Good morning and welcome to you all. It is with great pleasure that I welcome on stage Dr. Derek Crane, President of the EU Business School, who will officially open the conference. Thank you.
Dear guests, dear students, 1,000 years after Leonardo da Vinci, we have 3 Leonardos on stage today. They made a book about dreams, facts, and how your future will be influenced by your doing scenarios. I welcome Jim Snabe, who is the former CEO of SAP, actually president of the board of Siemens, small company, and also another small company, Mærsk, which you know from the container ships and the containers. The second speaker is Mikael Trolle. Both are coming from Denmark, a small country, but a healthy country, economically. Doers, hard workers. They have to fight against climate in several conditions, fight against the sea to survive. And both, they have a message to you, to the young people of today and tomorrow. Be a doer. It's quite important that you are confident you are the future of this globe. By acting of all what you say and bring it in doing scenarios. My life was inspired by several leaders and gurus. I call them gurus. And I think that after the conference of today, you will find 2 exceptional persons who inspire you this during 1 hour with their thoughts. As a last but not least, I want also to thank Peter Vanham, head writer and head of communication at World Economic Forum in New York, who through his contacts and his interviews, he brought both people for the first time to EU Business School. After dinner of yesterday evening, we found virtual friends. We know each other, we know several people in common. And I think it's not the last time that this panel will bring the ideas and their views to change this world in a better doing scenario. Thank you.
So, good morning, everybody. And thanks for allowing us to enter a room with so many young talents. Jim and I just briefly talked about that normally we are talking to audiences that are a little bit older, but this is really meaningful to be here today to share some of our ideas with you. We hope you will reflect on it, read about it, discuss it, confront us with what you agree in and what you disagree in, so that we can actually together try to figure out how leadership should be in a world that is changing dramatically on all scales, more or less, and that is what we would like to discuss with you. I would take you through a small kind of inspiration from this slide from the World Economic Forum, talking about these different kind of revolution or periods in the industrial age and how much that actually has changed during the years that we have actually been on this planet. And many would see it as a problem that we have a big impact from technology, and the digital impact on our daily life is a problem. We see it very differently. I think Jim would say it's really fascinating that we are allowed. I'm from biology and sports science, and you know we have like 80, 90 years on this planet where we can live here. Then it's up to our children and others to move our species further on this globe. And exactly what is happening right now is actually really fascinating. So if you see the first 100 years of the first industrial revolution, it was a period where you could really take one education, you could be an employee in one company, the company would maybe exist for generations, and that was how you conducted your business life, or your life as an employee. And even that continued in the next part from 80-70 to 90-60. I was born in 1951, so I was born just before the next third industrial revolution. And in 89, my oldest son, is from 93. And he cannot understand that the internet was not there before he was born. So he's born digital, like many of you guys. You're born digital. And what happened actually in 89, I mean, the globe in some way, or the planet, became transparent. Geopolitical kind of changes was major in that period. Europe changed totally. And in some way, the planet became very small. The interesting part was also that a lot of the devices that we used, and I always use this as a small example. For instance, I mean, probably you remember that the iPhone arrived in the United States, and that could also be a Samsung or whatever, in 2007. In 2009, we got it in Denmark. That is 10 years ago. And if you kind of think about how big an impact just that little device as a smartphone has been on our life, the way we conduct our personal life, our business life, the way we use it in our educational systems, it's only 10 years of a biological age of a human being of 80 or 90 years. And if this is going really fast, maybe the impact that small device or the technology would have had on our lives for 10 years, if that has to be the same the next couple of years, how many years do you think from now on and ahead it will take to generate the same transformation? If this is exponential, we're talking about 2 to 3 years. So who can foresee that? How do we think that it's reasonable to make plans regarding that? From a retrospective analysis of the world that we have experienced, and believe that that could be exactly the same or planned from stepstones that we know today. Maybe we have to do things differently. Because there was nobody 10 years ago that could make plans that described that we would arrive in 2019 the way we arrived today. So there's something that we've been doing before that has to be changed because of this. And that is maybe the explanation. We have to respect Walmart, great company, but also we have to look to other companies that is developing a different way. And maybe it's their mindset. I mean, if it's a plan that you want to arrive on the blue curve, maybe you would arrive on the blue curve. If you plan the future, maybe you would arrive in the future according to the plan. And maybe that's okay. But if the plan is not developing in a relevant way, because the conditions for your business is developing in a different way, it's not good to be on the plan. Because then you would end up in a strange situation where you actually, I'll go back, where you actually would end up fulfilling your goal, but nobody knows whether Walmart could have had the same path as Amazon. So the interesting part is, how do we actually think about ourselves, our leadership, how we conduct our businesses in an age that is changing so much? so that we maybe need to have a different mindset or a different approach to how we develop our businesses. And that was what struck me and Jim when we met in 2016. We were going to make actually a kind of mutual session on the Copenhagen Business School about high performance or future leadership. And we were a little conflicted because we have had experience in our former leadership life where things were working better for us than at other times. But when it works better for us at certain times, we were not doing it according to the rules. We did something different. I did something different in the sports world with my head coaching positions and my sports director positions and CEO positions in the sports world. It seems like we could unleash human potential in a totally different way if things was done a little bit differently than actually what we was told was the normal procedure on the normal strategic approach. And maybe that's also the secret, and we cannot kind of deep dive into that right now. Maybe we can do it with Peter later on about the slope of these curves and why do they develop in that way. But maybe Amazon do have a different mindset in how they develop their business. And maybe Walmart is actually on the curve, on the slope that they are, because they're aiming for it and they plan to hit the blue curve. Whereas Amazon does not consider really how the curve would develop, but they have a mindset and suddenly the curve developed in the way it does. So what happened around 2016 was that Jim already, I think, started up, but he can tell a little bit about that later on in 2012 about the dreams and details. So I didn't know anything about that when we met in 2016, but we confronted ourselves or asked ourselves, is it really so that what is actually what we have been taught through our whole life, that planning, controlling, reviewing the plan is not more the answer to business success in a future where the world is changing radically every day, that maybe what we thought was right today is not right tomorrow? Could it be that we have to look into other models, other ways to do things to be successful in our future leadership and business development? And could that also lead to the fact that we have to, as you saw in the fourth industrial revolution, that was also in the slide that I just showed you, that you need to reinvent yourself with the speed that is something that we haven't seen yet. Now, what do we do in these cases? And that led to that we started up discussing. Jim put the dreams and details element on the drawing board, and we started up talking about could we actually develop things better? And that was when I saw the parallel to what I experienced in sport, that if you have a strong dream with a very strong ambition, and everybody knows what it's all about, how to play the game. I mean, from you guys coming from Barcelona, some of you guys with Pep Guardiola, reinventing soccer all the time, making his players sometimes crazy, about the new mindset of modern football, the new framework that we're gonna kind of do things within, and the new skills that we're gonna kind of implement in our players and choose our players from. We discussed that a lot. Could it be so that if the dream is really inspiring, with a quite big ambition, that if we have the right understanding in how to approach that as employees, workers, team leaders, even top leaders, to travel towards that dream, towards that ambition, with the right mindset of how to do things, how to play the game within the framework, would that help us on the run, actually, to understand what we also have in the model, what kind of role skills and collaboration that is needed. And that was why we slowly, element by element, found out that maybe this model with the dreams, the details, and the platform with the 8 elements was an answer to the question that if we cannot go on in what we'll call it, with the old strategic waterfall approach to things,
maybe this could be done instead. And I have several examples from my development of athletes in sports that when we use this model, we outperformed teams that was on the planet, which was a kind of a strange experience at certain times. So actually what we would like to discuss with you, what we think would be interesting for the future to consider if you want to reinvent your business and your leadership, hopefully from a position of strength, where you identify the inflection points in time, ask yourself, is it time for a new season? With a kind of set-off from the existing season? Maybe you should ask yourself the following: where are the new relevant markets for our businesses? In the sports world, I would say, what kind of future arena do I want to play in? How do we actually find out the direction for that arena? And we do not talk about what kind of results we want to create in that arena. We talk about how we would arrive. In what condition? With what kind of skills and roles? And starting on traveling towards that ambition and dream, we need to know from the mindset how to do that. And Jim will get back to that, explaining, for instance, the mindset of SAP when they changed the business, which is a really, really good case, and is also in the book. For me, the mindset is, if we're going to play in a different way, if I show my players this is the arena of top sports of volleyball, they would instantly ask me, what is our ambition? Who are we going to play with? What kind of volleyball do we play there? What kind of role do I need to play in that system? What are the skills that I need to practice, and who am I going to do this with? And can you as a coach assure me the right framework so I can unleash my maximal potential to be the right traveling partner on the team, arriving in the ambition, fulfilling the dream? So that is what the model is about. It's about identifying direction where you have the relevant market, place, arena. It has to be inspiring because you need to have the best traveling group with you, and they really need to go there and they want to go there. You can have big ambitions because in the equation, and that's the trick about dreams and details, is that you can improve yourself on the detail level. You are not yet a young person that is just a resource that can certain things. You are a human being with a great potential that you can develop your whole life. In many cases, we show from talent work, also in sports, that it can be done exponential. And that's why we focus so much on developing performance and not so much focusing on creating results. Because if you develop performance in the right way, traveling the right way, with the right mindset, within the right framework, and you develop yourself as much as you can on the run, first of all, you will constantly be the best version of yourself, which support your self-esteem, make you acknowledged and loved on the journey, be able to make the right choices yourself, within the right mindset, within the framework set by the organization and the leader for sure. And in that case, in that iteration, you can have a contribution of human performance in a way that haven't been seen before. And I have been in a period of my life where I succeeded doing that, and for me it was amazing the results that you could create. So that is what the model is all about in brief kind of explanation. I hope it gives you a feeling about what this is all about, and then I would give the floor to Jim because he's a practitioner of this. He's done it already in companies, and I think you would listen. I think you would feel good about listening to his examples because they are really, really great. So, Jim.
Thank you, Michael. I met Michael a couple of years ago, and Michael is arguably the most successful sports coach in Denmark and took amateur teams to world-class levels. So I was already inspired. We began talking, It's like, so Michael runs a team of, volleyball players. There's 6 players on the team, they're on the court at the same time. And I came from the world of, SAP. We were 60,000 people. It's like, so how can there be something in common between what Michael is doing and what I am doing? And how could we get large organizations with more than 6 people in the game to perform at the level of Michael? So I got hugely inspired by Michael. Now I'm a practitioner in the world of business. I don't play sports that well like Michael. But imagine you could get high performance out of individuals. So the overlap between those 2 organizations, the 6 people playing a game with very clear rules, and an organization of 60,000 people all over the world, what is in common is that they all have human beings. And it seemed to me like in business, we were constantly trying to reduce the opportunities for human beings to be creative and come up with new ideas because we had these detailed plans on what to do next, and we would celebrate if we were on plan. And what if the plan is wrong? What are we then celebrating? And isn't it true that the plan itself is limiting people from doing things that were not planned? And we would punish them for that. But what if that was a better plan? That was the inspiration. My son asked me many years ago, so what do you do when you go to work? And he wasn't that old at the time, and I said, well, I go in meetings and we discuss things, and sometimes I make decisions. And he looked at me and said, anything else you do when you go to work? Well, sometimes I give a keynote, in front of people. And I said, he looked really disappointed at me and said, don't you do any real work? Now, what am I? I'm a student. And when I say I'm a student, it's because I am obsessed with learning. And the moment of meeting Michael and writing a book about a different leadership model was about learning as a student to solve one of the most difficult problems in business, in my opinion, which is not to restructure a company in crisis. I mean, the attention to change when you have a crisis is really high. Nobody will argue to stay current. They know that not changing will be worse, so they are willing to change. So the biggest challenge in business, in my mind, is how do you dramatically change a company when it's successful? Some of you have an idea to be a startup one day. You probably want to have build a company, and I can only encourage you to do that. But startup is easy, okay? You start with a blank sheet of paper. You have no legacy. You have no business that you could disrupt by doing what you are going to do. You disrupt someone else's business. The problem you will get with your startup, hopefully, is when it's successful. When it has become successful of doing something in a certain way that disrupted someone else, eventually you are on the peak of what you do, and most companies then continue to do that until they become irrelevant. There's so many examples of that. You mentioned the iPhone. Nokia was the peak of mobile business, and they got completely irrelevant and had to reinvent themselves from a position of weakness. And there are so many examples of that. So the student in me is asking the following question: how can we reinvent large companies, companies that are successful, companies that have employees all over the world? Because if they all get irrelevant, imagine the amount of people who lose their jobs. Imagine the value lost. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm in these giant companies, and I'm trying to turn them into the biggest startups in the world by challenging themselves and trying to reinvent themselves when they're still strong. Because if you lose out and you become too weak, with the speed of change that Michael talked about, the likelihood is that you'll never make it back again. Because the world moves on at an accelerated pace and an exponential curve, and if you're on a linear curve, the gap gets extremely big if you lose one corner. So now, why do I know that this is possible? Well, I had the fortunate luck to be employed by a company in the IT world when I was your age. And I joined SAP in 1989, and it turned out to be the European software company that would become a global leader in software. At the time, I didn't know that. We were 1,000 people when I joined. We were a startup. Today, the company is 90,000 people. And why is that possible with a company like that it actually kept being successful? Because the company reinvented itself 4 times. And it reinvented itself from a position of strength. When everything was really good, our chairman and one of the founders, Hasse Plattner, said, let's do something different. And we're like, why would you do that? Everything is fine. No, we're strong now. The world will change. The mainframe will die. There will be networks of computers. There will be mobile devices. There will be clouds. Cloud not as a weather condition, but as a new technology. How do we reinvent ourselves to not become irrelevant like most of our competitors did? So I'm now trying to take that into large companies like Siemens and AP Møller-Mærsk. Siemens, one of the largest organizations in the world, 380,000 people around the world, and we want to be nimble and fast like a startup. AP Møller-Mærsk, the largest shipping company in the world, they ship 20% of world trade that goes in containers is on the Mærsk boat somewhere, or the Mærsk terminal somewhere. And 25% of all refrigerated containers are transported by Mærsk. And so these are companies with significant impact on this world, and where the reinvention will have a huge impact on how we can make the world a better place as well, and I'll touch upon that. So that's basically what I'm trying to do, and I'd like to inspire you as well to challenge some of the assumptions around leadership, because you are the leaders of the future. Don't plan that future in details like my generation did. Don't limit people by making sure they deliver on your plans, which will be wrong because they're never exponential. And lead in a different way, which we call dreams and details, to be one of the models that we think can inspire. Why is this important? Well, I actually had the pleasure of working with the World Economic Forum, and they did a project called Digital Transformation of Industries. The idea was to look at industry by industry and see what could happen in a given industry if you were to take current technology and use it to its full potential. Would that be a better world or a worse world? Would the value be increasing? Would the size of the cake increase or decrease? And who would benefit? This was a very fascinating experience. And I give you just 4 of the examples here. Energy. Siemens is a big player in energy. We deliver most of the gas turbines to this world. We distribute energy. We have the largest wind turbine business in this world. And we consume a lot of the energy in trains and in factories and so on. So we're basically arguing that the rules of the game in energy business is changing dramatically if you use current technology to its full potential. What's the old assumptions in energy? Energy is you centralize production of energy. You generate energy from large energy factories. You burn fossil fuels and pollute, and then you distribute that out to manufacturing or consumers. The future of energy is decentralized. It's not fossil fuels based. It's going to be renewable energy. The kilowatt price for solar is going to be lower than gas turbine in a couple of years. At that moment in time, solar panels is no longer a philanthropic project. It's just the cheapest way of energy. The solar price kilowatt hour is halving every 14 months, which is like the Moore's law in technology, which eventually means that energy will be more or less for free. The sun alone delivers 4,000 more times energy to this planet than we consume. So even if we double our consumption, There's plenty of energy, but it's a very different energy business. You need to now assume decentralization. Every household will produce energy and consume energy, which means you need advanced, intelligent networks. You will produce energy at times when you don't need it, so you need storage situations. You need to be able to transport energy to areas that don't produce energy right now. This is a very different system. Now, is that a better or a worse energy system than we have today? It's dramatically better. It's cheap, maybe for free. It's available for everyone. There's still a couple of billion people who don't have electricity today. Imagine. It's sustainable. There's no pollution. That's a system we could build with current technology. That's fantastic. Now, why is that important? Well, manufacturing will go through similar dramatic change. So far, in the industrial area, we've been spending a lot of effort moving manufacturing to locations with cheap labor. Now, that assumption is going to be completely challenged. Cheap labor was in China, so China is today the manufacturing site of the world. So we ship all, materials or raw materials to China, and then they manufacture at cheap prices because of low labor, and then we bring all the products back. So two things will happen. First of all, China will be the largest consumer market in the world, so don't bring the products back because they're going to stay in China. And secondly, manufacturing with additive manufacturing, where you 3D print stuff, and with autonomous robotics, you can build single-piece manufacturing at a lower price than mass production. The consequence will be that you don't any longer go for mass factories, but individualization. You move manufacturing close to the customer so you understand customer needs, and now this is where energy comes in really important. You would put the manufacturing site where the energy price is low, because the factory has no people, but it does consume energy. That's a very different future. Is that a better future? Absolutely. We don't waste the resources on products in masses that nobody wants to buy, and then we give them a discount so they buy it and throw out the materials. We'll have circular economy manufacturing where the materials that are used in 3D printing can be repurposed for the next products, and we'll basically have a much more relevant product because it meets individual needs. Is that a better future? Absolutely. It's cheaper, it's more relevant, it's more sustainable. And you can go on and on, industry by industry like this. Healthcare. I mean, today's healthcare is about trying to fix a disease through generic efforts, a medicine or a chemotherapy that works on some people. In the future, we'll individualize therapy because we know exactly what the mutation is in that patient. Therefore, we'll have an exact treatment for that patient that is different to any other patients. And by the way, with the Fitbits and all of your sensors, we'll prevent the disease. Imagine what that means to health and living when we prevent the disease instead of trying to cure a painful disease with generic efforts with lots of negative consequences. By the way, that system will not even last because with the aging population, the costs of that old system will not be sustainable. So these are some of the ideas, and therefore we are in a situation where all industries will go through dramatic change. The assumptions that made companies successful are changing. If you're in the business of, fossil-based energy production centrally, you go out of business unless you dramatically shift your business to decentralized, intelligent networks in energy. It's a dramatic shift in mindset. And that's what we're arguing we need to do to keep reinventing successful companies and make startups out of all companies in the world, also those that are already successful. Now, why is that important? Well, you'll see in the book that 1989 was an important year in our opinion. I believe it was around the time when EU was invented, right? So Dirk, congratulations. It's also the year where I graduated.
that doesn't necessarily make, the reason for us believing it was an important year, but for me it was. But it was the year where the World Wide Web was invented. It just had its 30-year anniversary a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you celebrated that, but you should. And with the World Wide Web, everything became possible. And the technological advancements have accelerated on an exponential curve ever since, and it's very steep right now. What will happen the next couple of years with technologies like Internet of Things, where we connect a few billion devices to the Internet, and we collect the data from that, and we add artificial intelligence on top of that, will profoundly change the way businesses run, the way we do our jobs, if there are any, and the way we live our lives. Dramatic change. You've got to be in front of that change. Now, that same year, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. For me, that was a big moment, because until that moment in my life, the world was separated in two parts. There was, the Western part and the communistic part, and doing business across those boundaries was impossible to even imagine. When the Berlin Wall fell, the world became one place. Globalization accelerated, and those two events, technology advancements that give us any opportunity, unlimited in the future, combined with the fact that we can reach billions of people across borders, no limitations, globalization, it's one big world, were propelling my opportunities as an individual. Sometimes people ask me, how could you get those roles that you have? And I'm like, well, I lived in a time when these two things came together and created exponential opportunities, so you could have those opportunities as an individual. Now, what is happening now, 30 years later? Technology is accelerating at a pace it's really hard to imagine. I've spent a lot of time being a student on AI, and I suggest you all do that, no matter which industry you plan to be in, because it will have a profound impact in anything you're going to do in the future. But globalization is on reverse. Countries are building borders again. We're closing down. At a moment in time where the world has the biggest problems ever, the UN defined 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we actually have a chance to solve if we take the leadership and use the technology available. And we are completely, potentially missing that biggest opportunity ever to solve this world's biggest problems by collaborating across the entire globe and leveraging technology to solve relevant problems. What have we done so far? Well, we use technology to solve insignificant problems, if you ask me. So you can share a picture of a cappuccino cup that is, enhanced with, digital picture enhancement through AI, so that when your friends that are selected through algorithms see your picture, it looks really gorgeous and you can get a number of likes. We've allowed that to happen on platforms that have monopolies on your data, that know incredibly things about you, things you may not even know yourselves, that can influence outcomes of elections, that concentrate value on very, very, very few hands. Siemens has 380,000 people employed. The 4 biggest tech companies in the US have 340,000 people employed together. The value of those 4 companies is more than 30 times higher than the value of Siemens. That is, in essence, concentrating value on very, very few hands. And then they don't pay taxes. And then we wonder why people opt out and vote against the system. We are currently missing the biggest opportunity ever to solve the biggest world's problems. I'm convinced we can solve them all. And I quote the UN General Secretary for saying we might be the first generation who can solve poverty on this planet, and we are definitely the last to solve climate change. I am a concerned optimist. I'm concerned because the leadership necessary to get us there is not available right now, I look at you, because you are the future generations. You have to have that leadership. You've got to break the linear assumptions and change it to exponential opportunities where we leverage the opportunity we have to create a better future and create great businesses while solving some of the biggest problems on this planet. So, with that as an introduction, that's why it's so important that you have big dreams. And we use JFK in the book, his moonshot. Did you know it's 50 years ago that man landed on the moon and brought him safely back again? 50 years ago? Amazing. The computer that was used in the landing module of the Apollo mission had 32 kilobytes of main memory. Now, you may not know what that means, but that's the memory we have today in an average singing birthday card. I mean, these people had a lot of guts. But they had leadership, they had a vision, they had a dream for what we could do, and then they cared for the details that mattered the most in order to invent what was necessary to put a man on the moon and bring him safely back again. That's what we mean in the big picture when we talk about dreams and details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such an inspiring presentation to you both. Can I now ask Peter Vanham to come on stage? We'll conduct a more in-depth interview now. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, all right.
Okay. Well, good to see you again. I want to note at this point that actually I'm a student of Jim's. I was working at the World Economic Forum in a program called the Global Leadership Fellowship, and Jim actually was my dean. So we'll see if I can at least ask the right questions, because I know that you're a big fan of the Socratic method, where questions perhaps matter more than answers. So in that case, if you use that, you already have a pass not to answer the questions.
Exactly.
But we'll see. You know, I want to first, before I get to the questions, I want to again thank you so much for being here both, because I think it's truly exceptional to hear from leaders such as yourselves. It is something that many of us who are here today, we are often at the start of our careers, or perhaps a few years into our careers. But it is exceptional for us to hear from people who have done it all, and who don't tell us a theory that they think is true, but it is a theory that they know to be true. And you know it in your respective careers, Mikael from sports, both from a player perspective and from a coach perspective, and Jim also, you know it from leading companies. And so we're going to talk in this Q&A a little bit about your journey as well, because I think for many of us, we also want to know, how do we get there, right? Because it's fantastic to hear you speak about this, but we're not in a position right now to be executing on this, or at least that's what we believe. So we'll ask you about that, about your journey, and about your own reinventions, and about the seasons that you have gone through. So those are the two things that I would like to speak to you about, is the seasons that you've lived, and the reinventions that you've done, either yourself as a person, or with the companies or the organizations that you worked for. And then afterwards, we'll also have some time for questions from the audience. So if you want to think already a little bit about any questions that you may have, I think we'll have some 20 minutes or so for questions, and we'll get to those questions in the second half of this conversation. But first, and I want to start, Jim, with you, because you ended on quite a high note, but also it was quite a suspenseful moment, because you really upped the ante. You talked about a future, and it was almost like a future that could be very bright, or a future that could actually not be bright at all. And let's start from the perspective of the place where we are. We're in Barcelona, we're in Spain, we're in Europe. And you've talked about the company that you've led, which is, or the three companies really that you've led, which together employ many Europeans and many people actually from all over the world. You said several hundreds of thousands of people. But the new kids on the block, those that have said, you know what, guys, the last season is over. You were the champions of the last season. The season is over. Those new kids on the block, the Amazon that Mikael talked about, sorry about that. The Amazon that Mikael talked about, or the Facebook that you were talking about, those say it's a different world out there. And as a matter of fact, you may not even have as many employees, and it's going to be a different world. So what does that mean for the companies that you're leading? What does that mean? Can we even compete anymore? What should we do in this new season? Should we believe that there will be a decentralized network in which many new companies can thrive? Or is it really just sort of 5 big brothers, if you will, 5 big companies that will sort of manage it all for us?
So I think it's a very important question. And I do believe that every company, independent of size and history, has a chance in the next phase as well. It's actually the leadership that defines whether or not you will be relevant for the future. It's not the company itself. And I can give you a couple of examples. If I look at SAP, I got a call on a cold February day. And I was outside of my house in Denmark. It's a cold country, and I was shoveling snow, and the mobile phone goes off, and I'm like, I'm not going to pick that up now. And I'm a curious person. Always stay curious, okay? So I had to see who is it. And it was the chairman of the company, so I figured, maybe I should pick it up. So I did. And he said, would you be the co-CEO of the company? And I asked him 2 questions. I said, number one, who's the co? I mean, if you're ever in a co-CEO situation, you have to understand that that's more intense, almost like a marriage, because you have to act like one, even though you're 2. And ideally, you're 2 very different people. Otherwise, why bother having 2? And when he said it's Bill McDermott, who's very different to me, but I trusted like a brother, I knew together we could be very successful. And then the second question was, why do you want to change the CEO? And he said, he didn't say it that way, but that's what he meant. We need to dramatically change the company, even though we're doing well. We need to reinvent. And then I said yes. And what was that? That was actually a company that was extremely successful. SAP had in 2010 won the market of ERP systems, the boring systems that run companies in efficient ways and manage resources for companies. And so how could you reinvent that? We kind of assumed we had won. The market was not a high growth market. So it was getting into a profitability game. And Bill and I sat together and said, well, if we're in charge of this, we're going to reinvent the company. We're going to be relevant in the next phase, not just the current. And we started a process, which is the same process that we are starting at A.P. Møller and at Siemens, which is go back to your core. What is it exactly you're doing? Well, at SAP, we were an ERP company. And some people had forgotten, what does that mean? It actually means enterprise resource planning. So what does that mean? We manage resources for enterprises. Okay. We're the best at that in the world, yes. We have companies, customers in all industries, from mining to manufacturing to distribution to consumer, which means we actually manage resources across entire value chains. What if we could manage the resources of the world? With 7 billion people, scarcity of resource in the industrial age where we just accept enormous waste will become the limitation for growth and opportunity. And suddenly we came back to our core and said, that core, is that relevant for the future? Absolutely. This world will go to 9 billion people, so it's going to be more and more important. Well, if that's our core, if that's what we do, then how do we reinvent that company based on that core? Because it's going to be super relevant, but in a different context, in a different way. And the same is happening, at Siemens. So energy systems, from fossil to renewable. You could either sit down and, be unhappy because the fossil business goes down and it's a very big part of the profit. Or you can say, let's become the biggest wind turbine business in the world, and we did that. We merged actually with a Spanish company, Gamesa, And we created the largest installed base of wind turbines, and we are now competing at prices that are half of what they were only 4 years ago. And suddenly wind is becoming the cheapest energy source. In areas where you don't have enough sun, that's a perfect infrastructure. So, and what was the core again? We are good at generating energy and distributing it. And if the world becomes a distributed energy system, we need to leverage new.
And so you've proven, of course, that you can do that. Now, Dirk, I don't know with what kind of exaggeration he said it, but he called you a Leonardo, which is, of course, a little bit of a hyperbole, I assume. But it's true that either you are a Leonardo or there's a more structural problem. I explain. If you look at the 20 largest tech companies in the world, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that SAP is the only European company in that top 20. Mikael told us about the new digital revolution that is starting, which is going to be, all important for every industry. Yet, of the largest 20 companies in the world that lead that revolution, only one is European. Again, fantastic that you led that company and you truly are a Leonardo in that case. Or is it so that there is something else going on? Perhaps that it's not just a new season that started, but that all of a sudden there's players from a new league that are entering the field. And if that's the case, you can win a game that you're playing, but you can't win from competitors that you're not able to play against. So what is going on that front?
So the description you have is accurate. By the way, I'm not a Leonardo because he was a genius. I'm still a student. And what was his genius was he actually looked into the future and he invented things that only became real, years later, like a helicopter and what have you. So he could see around the corner way before everyone else, and that's a little bit what you need to be able to do. So if you take the current situation, tech is basically US companies now beginning to be Chinese companies, and the revolution in China is quite extraordinary. We can talk about that. And yes, Europe has not gotten into that. Now, what is that tech? It's a consumer tech. It's solving, in my mind, not the most relevant problems on this planet. The pictures of my cappuccinos on Snapchat and Instagram. The world does not get more productive because I sit and share pictures of it on Instagram. I'm not against the app, and it's nice to get connection with my kids, but it's not fundamental, a big value creation. It's actually distracting more than creating value. The real problems are the SDGs. It's about water and energy and so on, and reducing waste and climate change and that.
Now, you talked about market value, and in market value, it seems as though...
Yes, they won that debate. So my point is only, they won in a phase where the world began to digitize. Every time there was a new phase, there was new opportunity. The same was true with oil or chemicals or what have you. There were some giants who started that. But eventually, we get to solve the real problems. I think the real problems are more B2B oriented. They're more, physical. I actually believe the next phase of digital is combining hardware and software. And I bet you that there will be a race where the Googles of this world will try and get into the physical world as fast as possible. Why do they do autonomous cars? Because they want to get the data from the physical world, not just the consumers. And there will be the physical companies like Siemens and AP Müller and others who will want to add a digital dimension. Whoever masters both at the same time will win the next phase. So again, don't look at the current situation or look back. Think about what is the next phase. It's probably IoT, Internet of Things, and AI, and then suddenly it's a huge advantage to own the assets, to have produced a wind turbine, to know where the container is and what temperature it has and what speed it's moving, because that data will be the next valuable source of innovation. And so therefore, I believe the companies that are in the physical world have a huge chance still, but they got to get much faster.
Yeah.
They're too slow.
So we would be amiss to look at the market value of the biggest companies today.
Yes.
We have to think about what are going to be the biggest companies of tomorrow.
Yes.
And you're saying it's going to be different ones.
And my son asked me, so Dad, what should I be? And first of all, I tell him I still haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. And then, so don't worry. And then I said, well, you got to at least think, do you want to be excited about the tech companies of today that make, toys and stuff, or do you want to solve real problems? Imagine you could take that in innovation that you guys have in the room and solve real problems. Not just the things that get, dramatically valuable very short and then you can cash in and have a happy life, but a meaningless life.
Yeah. Now, it's true, of course, that geography, even in a new season, still matters. We see it now. There's sort of a revenge of geography. You talk about decentralization, and basically you can do anything from anywhere.
Yes.
But then if you look at the reality of where the hubs are, you see a handful of cities or regions that really concentrate talent, capital, and technology. Now, I want to ask you, because a lot of these people are going to be entering the labor market quite soon, and they will have a choice to make. Many people came from all over the world to here, and they will have to decide, if I graduate, will I go back to my region where I came from? Will I stay in this region, or will I go somewhere else? So I want to ask you, and perhaps we should, just to make sure that we know who our audience is, maybe we should ask first where they come from. So maybe I want to see a show of hands to see, and I'll ask the 5 or 6 big regions in the world. So who here is from Europe? So about a third or so is from Europe. Who here is from Asia? So about maybe a sixth or so. Who here is from, let's see, Africa? So that's also quite a good number. Who here is from Latin America? Also many. And who here is from North America? Also a few, just a few. Now we've seen, and sorry, I want to be on one country a little bit more specific. Who here is from China? Just 3 or 4, 5. So when you look at the 2 countries where those hubs are concentrated with technology, capital, and talent, we have a dozen people in the room. If you look at all the other regions in the world, we've got 600 other people in the room. What is your message to these people? Where should they go? And what should they do?
See, the whole thing about our book is that we don't think that planning the future is done well by looking back or looking at current. Because then you will project based on history. And your projection will be at best linear. You have to think 5 years out, 10 years out. Where will the world be in 5 or 10 years? And then you deduct from that, you kind of work backwards and say, so what would I do today? There is no doubt in my mind that the future growth will be in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America. That's how it is. That's where the, let's say, unfulfilled opportunities still are. That's where you have millions of people who move into a middle class and expect new things, and you've got to do it in more sustainable ways. And that's, to me, that all spells opportunity. And so in that sense, you have a very good mix. On top of that, I would like to say that I think the future is a network where people connect, not just physically in the city that they're in, that will be important, but they actually connect globally. And companies are not hierarchical structures. We write about that in the book, and Mikael can talk much more about that. It's actually network of capabilities that bring things together in new ways. Imagine the value of you all, not just coming from where you come from and where you're going, but the network that you can create from a school like this, which is kind of unique in this planet. You cover the world. Keep those friendships. Keep those networks, because that's how organizations will work in the future. It's a huge value that is often not seen. So that decentralization is connected. My phone is decentral. It's a lot of compute power, but it's only valuable because it's connected. And the same with you. You have that talent, you have that leadership, but you're connected. What an opportunity.
Yeah, and of course, I want to stress this again, you don't say this out of thin air. You lead 2 of the largest companies in the world, and we will talk a little bit at the end of the conversation perhaps about those structural changes you see in the global economy. But we've both shown that it doesn't matter necessarily where you're from, especially it doesn't matter that you are big or that you're small when you begin. It is possible to compete at a top level, at a global level. And I want to ask somebody who knows this very intimately, your colleague Mikael, Because Mikael, you come from Denmark, obviously. Both of you come from Denmark, but you played with in volleyball. Your constraints are to have the players of Denmark, which is a country of 5 million people, 6 million people, and you have to compete at a global level with players from all over the world. Especially if you play in the European leagues, you will have to play against teams from Italy, from Poland, from all the top European leagues. And if you play on the international level, we haven't even talked about the top teams from Asia and other places in the world. Now, could you tell us a little bit about how you overcome this idea that because you're small, you can't win? How do you do it? How do you bring a team of individuals? How do you bring a team to the top? How do you do that?
I mean, first of all, I think it started when I was really, really young. I had some really good coaches that created this kind of idea that you could actually perform to a level that was not achieved within the normal way of doing things. So I was a generation as a young athlete where we started up practicing a lot more than others and so on, and found out how much you can actually develop yourself in these kind of systems if you do things
that was
in the right way.
the dream or the mindset?
That was both the dream and the mindset actually, and also the ambition at that time. I think we just called it the spirit of the club should be like that. So we were never talking about winning championships or winning matches. We were always talking about where we wanted to go. And that is confirmed by many other sports cultures, and also in culture in general, and also in the business world, that if you think like that, you surprise yourself in how much you can develop. And we know it from optimal talent work, it's the same. So when I was 27 years old, I had knee problems and back problems and so on. But I really wanted still to be a part of that because I had a very strong sport identity. So I thought it was better that I actually stepped out of the court and tried to generate this new kind of environment or culture where we could still keep that dream. And it was a coincidence that it was like that, because exactly as you mentioned before, when you're coming from a small country with not that many athletes within a sport like volleyball, that is really global and really big, and especially in Europe, very strong. If you try to plan to reach within 4 years, I mean, I collected guys that were 16, 17 years old. They started their career pretty late. They were big guys and so on. And we worked for 4 years, from 87 until 91, when we qualified for the Champions League playoff and Final 8 for the first time. If we had made a plan for that, everybody from the beginning, from looking back on what was possible, would have said, that's not possible. So the mindset would have been, that's not possible.
Just like today, perhaps people in business, from Europe might say, it's not possible that we create the next Amazon. It's not possible that we create the next
We
Facebook.
talk about how to solve climate change and all these kind of challenges that Jim is also addressing. It's also because we have to look a lot more on what do we need to do? What do we need to change? How do we need to develop things? How do we need to arrive in the future? And if we arrive in that way, probably when it's time to solve it, we can do it if we really focus on that. That was the mindset of what we did. And what actually happened in that period was that a proof that you could, without paying any players, you could ask them to allocate so much time for this passion. And that showed me actually that if you have a dream and you have a very strong ambition, you motivate people in a totally different way, because you allow them to unfold their potential to the maximal extent. And as Jim says, still being a student of their performance life until they stop, and see how far you can drive that process. And the interesting part was actually that meanwhile we did that, it was possible to win 230 matches in a row in Denmark, which is of course not the level of Italy. But because you became very strong at the international scale, you became kind of very, very nearly monopoly in your own country at that time. I think that if the plan has been to win the championship every year, probably we would have missed some on the road.
And what was the goal then, or what was the dream then?
The dream was actually not to create any result. That's also a part of it. We wanted to work on our capabilities, or our playing capabilities, so it was possible to enter the arenas with the best teams in the world, to have a chance to be allowed to play with them.
So there is really, it is fair to make that comparison between sports and business. It is fair to say you have to be able to dream big, because guess what? Both in sports and in business, it is possible to achieve the really big things.
And if you look into how much a dream and an ambition actually can move your motivation to a higher scale of motivation, we call it integrated, meaningful motivation, instead of external regulated motivation.
Say that again?
You actually discriminate, and we have it in the book, between different kind of levels of motivation. And maybe in what we call the old days, we have, consequence or bonuses or whatever, and we have result goals and KPIs and so on. That was big consequence in measuring whether you were successful or not. Here we are moving the motivation to be what we call meaningful integrated motivation, which means that you're constantly the right traveling partner, as I talked about, on the journey towards the ambition and your dream. And you're not talking about that within the next 2 months you should aim for this. And if you're not exactly hitting that kind of stepstone, you would never make it. Or I don't believe that you can do it. I mean, we constantly try to unleash the potential in an actual way. And actually it shows us also from the theory that system to allow people to work in that way would outcompete the way we've been thinking about this before.
And again,
and that was what happened in that period.
And you know that both, again, from theory and from practice, because you say it off the cuff. We won 240. I want you to say 240 games in a row.
It was 30, but anyway, yeah, it was pretty close.
230. I mean, of course.
And it was never boring to show up at practice after winning a title, of course. But it was not about winning the next title. It was about arriving in a new place.
Right.
The next season, and it was about identifying also new elements of the new season.
Sure.
That we could implement, prepare, and still also in the season that we could currently optimize. Also that we're talking a lot about that in the book, whether you are in the season and optimizing things, or you are in between seasons and you in the season have prepared new seasons, that you with the right timing, the right balance, can implement in the right situation to aim for new successes or performance levels. And if you can do that, the scoreboard will take care of itself.
The scoreboard will take care of itself. Now, of course, we're at the end of a season now here at the school. Mm-hmm. In a few weeks, the season will be over, so to speak, I think for most people. Yeah. And some of the people here in the room will go on to a new season, or they will go to in-between season. Actually, how many of you are graduating this year? So about a third or so are graduating this year. So these people are now going on to a new season. They have to prepare for a new season. What would you say? How do you get started? Because you can't go to the labor market, so to speak, or get to a job and win 240 times in a row, whatever that may mean in a job. How do you find your challenge? Because you're like, wow, how do you find a challenge? How do you find your dream? If you're sitting in a room, how is it that you find that dream and that challenge?
I think it's to repeat some of the things that Jim actually mentioned, to be a student of life and to prepare a journey through your life as a competent individual with a self-esteem that is currently calibrated towards that journey that you have. It can be a little fluffy maybe, but
of course, because people are now, they have to go and they have to apply for a job.
But you have to start up. You just have to do it. I mean, you have to jump around on the possible platform that you can have, trying to test out your competences, find kind of possibilities together with good leaders that would help you to unleash your potential and be the best version of yourself, and try that out. And suddenly, that's a great thing about talent work. You never know who is a talent before you expose yourself for talent development and find out if you develop extraordinary abilities because you had an extraordinary potential.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of conduct your own talent work by searching through life how you can be positioned in the right way. And of course, you would always be measured whether you can be a traveling partner for a company or whatever that creates value for that company. Because
Yeah.
if not, you would not be invited on the journey.
And I understand from that perhaps you shouldn't start off with the dream right away. Perhaps you just have to make sure that you're training, and along the route you'll find, you know what, this is the league I'm going to play in, this is the sports I'm going to play in, and these are the dreams that I should have. So I want to ask now again to Jim. I mean, you've been there before. When we turn back the clock to when you were maybe 23 years old, you also found your first challenge, and it happened to be that it was a bullseye. You hit the bullseye because you stayed at that company, I think, for most of your career. How did you know, and how would you, if you were to start your career again today, how would you choose what league to play in?
Well, first of all, I would make sure that I got as lucky as I got. So make sure you get that. To build on what Mikael said, which is absolutely true, I believe that a career is not about your destiny, but about what capabilities do you want to be excelling at. So you don't necessarily find jobs with a title in a specific company. You find opportunities to learn things that are important for what you feel is important for your development. And so, yes, I was in the same company for more than 20 years.
SAP. You started at SAP as a trainee.
I started as a trainee in 1990. And why did I start as a trainee? Because trainee sounded like I'm going to learn. I got a terrible salary, but I got to learn. And they gave me 12 months focused education in various aspects of the company at the headquarters. Now that was the beginning of, okay, I know a lot now. And then my philosophy was to constantly try and get a role where I could make myself no longer needed as soon as possible. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, you know, why would you not enjoy the seat you finally got? And I'm like, well, if I can understand the role I got, I became a consulting manager, so I should manage consultants. I was the youngest guy in the team, and I'm like, okay, if I can make someone else take this role as soon as possible, then I can be released to learn something else. And if I'm the only one that can do this job, the likelihood of management wanting me to go somewhere else is zero. So I constantly tried to do three things when I got a new role. I saw it as a project, not as a role. And I said, in this project, I will, number one, understand what's going on in the area of responsibility I have. Number two, make a plan for how I can improve the performance of this and the people within it. And number three, make sure that I'm no longer needed. And then typically...
Was that deliberate from the start?
It was quite deliberate from the start, yes.
So it's something that we can still apply today?
Yes. And I think it's absolutely critical. I think I made a mistake on the first one, actually, where I thought this one I have to
hold on to it.
I hold on to that. And I'm like, and eventually I was, pretty good at that, but there was no one obvious to take over, and nobody suggested me any other job. So then I was headhunted for IBM. And that was the trigger for me to get out of that, because internally I was the best at what I was doing, and therefore I was unlikely to move on. And then I promised myself that I would ask more questions than answer them and build my team and make sure that there was succession ready to take over my role so that I was no longer needed. And that kept driving my career. I never had the same job more than 3 or 4 years, even though I was in the same company for 20.
Was that a turning point for you, sort of to get unstuck
Yes.
from maybe a more, let's say, the Walmart curve, the blue curve, as Mikael called it, to more the Amazon curve?
Yes, I think the switch to IBM, I was there for 2 years and I learned a lot from IBM. Then I was asked to come back to SAP actually and run a country. But that feeling stuck, even though I was good, taught me to changed completely my mindset around this. So since then, I have been working on getting myself no longer needed after having improved the business that
Because you understand that it's beneficial both for the company and for yourself.
Exactly. And two, I've always been eager to go into areas where I had to learn something new. So that has also been a key driver. And three, and I think that's important for all of you, is that I kept staying curious on what I could do better. So I always promised myself, if you want to avoid getting stuck, you have to constantly, at least every 6 months, take a look in the mirror. Search for the things in the mirror you don't like, and make a plan for how to improve it on your leadership capability. And that's why I call myself a student. That's why I was inspired by Mikael, and we wrote a book together. It's not because we wanted to write a book, it's because I wanted to learn. And if you do that, it's like an athlete that always works on improving performance. If you do that with leadership, you become a great leader. Stay humble and curious, and look in the mirror, and make a plan for how you can improve. Why would you do that in sports, but not as a leader?
Is it something that you would say it took you perhaps a few years into your career to have that understanding and that vision of how to progress later on in the career? In other words, are those first few years, I've heard some other CEOs say, you know what, it doesn't matter what you do in the first few years of your career, as long as you gather a lot of different experiences, that you first of all find out, as Mikael said, where your talents really lie, and secondly, well, you have a breadth of experience. Would you subscribe to that?
Yes, it took me 4.5 years where I basically said, I want to learn as much as possible. I said to myself, I want to be a good consultant. I want to be a good teacher, because teaching people is the best way to learn. I want to be good at sales. I didn't necessarily want to be a salesperson, but you have to understand sales. Otherwise, you don't understand business. And I want to be a good innovator. And so I said, for the first 4 years, whatever task I get, I was actually going horizontal. I was deliberately trying not to get promoted vertically, because the height of a pyramid is defined by how wide the platform is, or the foundation is. So go horizontal and learn as much as possible, and then begin to specialize on the areas where you feel you're best at and motivates you the most. Then you have a broad foundation which allows you to build a bigger pyramid.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's a great comparison point, and it's probably physically true, but you say that from experience.
Yes.
Sometimes, however, we're forced to reinvent ourselves. Sometimes we see a new season coming, and we know we have to reinvent ourselves. Sometimes we're forced. And Mikael, I think you were kind of forced to reinvent yourself, I believe, because you had a career. You had a career in volleyball as a player, and then at some point you said you had injuries. You had back injuries and knee injuries, basically a career-ending injury, if you will. And you were forced to reinvent yourself. How do you make that switch? It's very tough for some people if they encounter something that's tough out of their own powers.
But I think, as we talked about, I was just searching for a new identity within the platform sports.
Were you okay with that? Did you have any, mentally it's not easy, of
remember
course.
I called the chairman of the club and said, I'm going to quit playing. I think I would be a great head coach for the men's and the women's team the next season. And it was totally silent in the phone. I don't think he thought it was a good idea. So I actually proposed myself as the new head coach. And I said, probably it would be a little awkward for the team because I just played together with all my teammates. We have to handle that. But I think if we should move on to the next kind of stage where we want to play, I think I should be the one in this new season. And I think I really thought to myself that I needed to do that if we should aim for that ambition. So that was kind of maybe a little kind of thinking of how I thought about yourself. But I realized that I could not reach that ambition by being still a player on the court. Old and worn out and so on. So I had to change or change business totally. And then, I mean, there was a lot of changes after that because started working with the federation and so on. I had many different jobs like Jim. I was in volleyball
Right.
for 28 years, but every year was nearly a new season.
Yeah, but of course it's often the case that those first turning points are the most crucial ones, right?
Yeah.
Because they set something in motion. No? Jim said that, that first time that I was unstuck by IBM calling me, and there I learned what my repeated habit should be. In your case, though, it was more a case, you say, of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It was you who unstuck yourself, so to speak.
Yeah, and exactly, it's happened now. I'm turning 60 in June, and for me it's a totally new season. It's a very, very steep learning curve to be together with this guy coming from my world, but it's really challenging and extremely inspiring to be in, and that makes you younger, and you just have to find out how to handle that.
How do you get that mentality, though? Because, both when you're 27 and you're at the top of your physical abilities, and then when you turn 60, I'm sure it's not easy mentally to have to say, you know what, I'm at the height of something, and now it's going to go down.
But it is dreams and details, Peter. It's like, suddenly a new dream is there.
And it's possible at any age and at
then
any
you
stage
can
of your
find the
career.
direction, you see the ambition, you try to figure out how can we do this, what can be the mindset, and then you just have to throw yourselves into the details and work on the role, work on your skills, and believe that you can do it. And I remember in the beginning I was talking to Jim and said, maybe we could, or I could advise businesses in the future, but I'm a little uncertain. And Jim said, no, I'm not uncertain. It's just a matter of making a new season. And so I think it's possible. And I would also give another advice to the students actually, that stick to the backbone, which is education, but try to do it parallel with possibilities of looking into the real world, finding out what is going on. I was very, very fortunate that I could stay a long period in the University of Copenhagen. I started up teaching at the university before I was graduated there in sport and so on. It was a little problem during the exams and so on. And I had my team at the same time, so I could merge all these things to be a student of leadership, biology, sports physiology and psychology,
right.
All these kind of things. And so I think, and that is maybe where we have to push. We do not have to push to finalize your education and have a job, and then have that job and that career and so on. Well, we have to push ourselves to be involved in different things,
right.
To figure out where you have your talent and your potential, and learn
and that
a lot.
has truly changed, though, right? Because when you look at the model of the first and the second industrial revolution, education as well was some phase in your life from 0 to 20 or so, and then you went on to another phase in your life, which was working for one company, etc.
Yeah.
And we saw in your presentation that in the digital revolution, and you clearly believe this, that it's a continuous reinvention, not just in terms of companies and industries, but that applies to the individual as well.
Yeah,
and
so
therefore,
you have to be a person that are able to, as Jim is saying, being a student your whole life, figuring out what this life is all about. And I think if some of you want to be leaders and go into leadership, maybe you need to expose yourself for being a leader. You need to create as much feedback that you can get. And you need to reflect a lot on what works for you and what does not work, which can be pretty hard sometimes. So it's okay to be a little uncertain, concerned about how you do things, as long as you have the right mindset and you know where to go.
There's a few good examples of that in the book, and I want to get now to questions also from the audience. But rest assured, there's a lot of good examples in the book, and one good example is of how SAP reinvented itself as a company many times. We could talk about it, but I want to make sure that we hear from the audience. So I'm going to suggest that we get a few questions. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. I'll take questions over there. And stand up when the microphone comes. There's 2 questions over there. You can both ask your questions. We'll take those 2 questions, and I will take another set of 2 questions right after that. So state your name and your question, please.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Nikita, and I'm currently finishing up my master's degree in digital business. And Jim, I have a question to you. In some of my classes, we touched an example of SAP company and how it went through the change in revenue models and the overall change in the organization. So you probably agree with me that in order to perform such change, first of all, you have to visualize the final point of where you want to be, and then work accordingly to the plan. So my following question is, how you were able to motivate yourself and motivate people around you to perform such transition and such change? Because usually, I mean, the human nature what I'm trying to say, humans are more trying to stick to when times are good, and they're not willing to change.
Thank you.
What are some key elements that you want to share with us? Thank you.
Thank you. And then I think there's one more question there, and then afterwards we'll get to questions from the other side of the room.
Hi, do you hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Francisco. I have a question, and I would like actually both of you to answer. You've been talking a lot about a system that's constantly changing and how is it changing, but I would like to know what's good, what's working now that we want and we think we should keep for the future.
Very well, thank you. Thank you for those two questions.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
So maybe I start with the SAP question. I actually believe that you've got to start with logic, in that you've got to have an opinion about where the future is and what is necessary to master in that future in order for you to be successful there. For SAP, we had a great business model of selling software. The world was dramatically moving to cloud, and cloud is a subscription model where you get a fee every month, and you have basically when you go from one model where you get all the money day one to a subscription every month, it's a challenge because you lose a lot of revenue the moment you go to that model. So that was our dilemma. We knew that the company felt successful. We knew that most of the people in the company felt that we couldn't learn from competition because they were number 2 and 3 and 4. So why would you learn from them? And what did we do was your question, to change this mindset. So first of all, we tried to translate the logical plan of becoming a cloud company to an emotional plan that excited people. And you'll find it in the book. We talked about our purpose. We wanted to make the world run better. And the moment that really was our John F. Kennedy moonshot was the following vision. We said we want to reach 1 billion people with our software. That was the mindset. Now imagine you're a software engineer and you hear that. When we try to say we want to be a 20 billion euro company with 35% margins, the software engineer would go, okay.
Not really inspiring.
Just like you now, okay. But when we said we're going to reach 1 billion people with our software, a software engineer would go, wow, are you telling me that if I make a piece of software and we reach our vision, then 1 billion people will use what I made and I will improve their lives? Man, that is exciting. And then they began to think through that and say, whoa, 1 billion people. Then it has to be intuitive and easy because we can't train 1 billion people in Waldorf, Germany. And I'm like, that's a good thought, keep that. And they said, oh, then it has to be on mobile devices because you can't install this on complex IT systems. Yes. And they said, well, then it has to be cloud because we cannot sell in the traditional way. They have to consume it through the cloud. And these were the right conclusions, but now they made their own conclusions. We didn't have a business plan that said that. So that was, I would argue, the inspiration that caught fire, and people got excited about changing the company. And the second thing we did, we actually went out and were humble enough to learn from other companies. So I took my management team to meet other companies, not in our industry, but that were able to do certain things, the details that were important for our future, where we were not world class. So one example, I took the software leaders to the EA games. You probably know EA games. They do FIFA and all of these games. And they are really, really good in user experience. Otherwise, the game doesn't work. And we learned from them that they have this golden rule that says visible joy in 7 minutes, which means that before they release a new game, they take young people from the street who are eager to help them into a room for 48 hours. They feed them Coca-Cola and pizza, no sleep, and they observe how they play the new game, and they look for visible joy in 7 minutes. So if you buy the Tiger Woods golf game, I don't know if it's still called Tiger Woods, the first 2 or 3 holes, you will shoot long and straight, no matter what you do with the controller. Because it's super easy, and you get visible joy in 7 minutes. Then it gets harder. And can you imagine, sitting with the software engineers of SAP, and I said to them, listen guys, do you think we are more or less than 7 minutes to visible joy with SAP software? At the time, it was 7 years before users were happy. And so that's only to say that even if you're the leader and you feel you won already, you have to have the humility to go and learn from someone in the details that matter the most for the future, where you need perfection and you don't have it today.
There was a second question about the change in the systems that remain the same, and whether it's good sometimes that the system remains the same. You want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, we are back to and thanks for the question, to understanding the difference between kind of controlling a plan and what we are actually arguing, that you have an ambition and a new mindset. For instance, Jim is showing that if you have a mindset of reaching 1 billion people, then suddenly it impacts the employees and the whole company on the details level, where they ask themselves, then we have to do things differently. So I think what is important here is that we are so keen on figuring out exactly what the mindset should be to create a new season.
Yeah.
And if that is done in the right way, people would, if you create a good platform for them and the right framework, they would be so eager in questioning themselves, how can I reform my role? How can I adapt, create new skills and so on? How can I find new ways of doing things with others, like Jim is just describing, that actually develop things in a way that is dramatically when you do it in that way. And the message here is, do we believe that controlling a plan can create that impact? I for sure know that it cannot.
No.
But thinking the other way around that Jim just brilliantly described was changing the whole mindset of the company, so it would also be ridiculous to still claim that we can do what we did before.
And that's, of course, in the case that you have to change certain ways because there is a new season that starts. When a new season starts, you have no choice whether to accept it or not. It starts with or without you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if I interpret the question correctly, but there are also things, and that's a question mark, aren't there also things that never change?
Yes.
And that should never change?
Yes. I think that's why when you do that projection into the future, then you kind of know where you're going. And to get there, you actually have to go back to your question. What needs to stay? What is it that I'm super proud of? What is my core? And how do I repurpose that in the future? Because you can't be something you're not. You know, HP tried to be a software company. Well, guess what? HP is a 98% hardware company. You can't be something you're not. So be proud of the hardware that you have and try and see how can that become something relevant. And maybe on let's say, a human level, what needs to stay? I believe that instead of being concerned that robots will take our jobs, we should be relieved that robots will take all the boring, repetitive tasks so that the constant stays, we have time for relationships. Don't get distracted by the little phone. Do not have relationships. You know, I sat in a romantic restaurant in a very romantic island in the middle of nowhere, and I saw people, you know, in a romantic setting, and they were looking at their iPhones. And like, really? So, and they were probably on honeymoon, by the way. Really? And so I think what needs to stay, and maybe we can accelerate that in the future, is that we let the machines do the boring tasks so we can have relationships and stay creative. And in settings like this, that would be wonderful. I would love that to stay, not lose that.
Very well, thank you. I want to take some questions also from this side of the audience. So if you have questions, raise your hand. I see one in the back there and one in the front here. So we'll take those two questions, and perhaps we'll get to two more questions after that.
So I'm Nawaz, and thanks for sharing the answers with the other questions. The question that I have is, how do you deal with uncertainty and also encourage your team members to follow an undiscovered path with the projections, as you said? How would you convince yourself and the other person, and also sustain yourself and the team to achieve the target?
Thank you, and I will take one more question up there. Perhaps, yep, go ahead.
Thank you for being here, Peter, Michael, and Jim. Jim, my question is directed to you. You touched upon a little bit about now globalization reversing and nationalization coming in more. Do you think, what's your own opinion? Do you think it's because people are not seeing the advantages of globalization, and how industry or governments can help change that perception of people?
Thank you. So one question about uncertainty and how to deal with it, and one question on deglobalization and can we reverse it, or should we reverse it?
I think it's really relevant with the question about uncertainty, and I think that is something we have to kind of get used to. And that is also why we need to understand that if the dream and the ambition is big, the only way to achieve that is through changing our mindset, but also realizing that we have to develop as human beings. We are not a constant resource, but we have a great potential and ability to develop. And that uncertainty should be balanced with that kind of trust within ourselves that we actually can develop, especially if the room for development as employees would be different, because we have a lot of machines to take care of things that we had to take care of before, like Jim is talking about. So this is a kind of, but to be quite honest, as human beings from a biological point of view, that's not natural for us. Maybe that is also the explanation why we, for many years, have done things that we today think has not unleashed the maximum potential, even though that it has been pretty good, what has happened the last 20, 30, 40 years after the Second World War. So that would be a challenge, but it is possible. And I think it's believing in the possibilities of development, being a student of life, changing your capabilities on the run. And if you believe strongly in that, you can avoid that uncertainty when you start traveling through your life in the right way.
If you put it into I form, if you say, when I was uncertain, how did you deal with that when you were uncertain?
But I strongly believe that that was a feeling I had to cope with, but I have a strong belief that I could actually develop into things that would remove kind of that uncertainty on the run. But I needed to work hard on developing.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing to talk to top achievers like yourselves. You know, when I think about uncertainty, I sometimes didn't know what to do next. I sometimes still have that. Is it, if we are more like, you know, me in that sense, and uncertainty is a little bit frightful and we don't know what to do, is it what's your recommendation? Do you seek out somebody to ask for advice or to ask for guidance, or how do you deal with uncertainty when you really don't have that mindset yet of like, yeah, it's going to be better if I...
You have to make some research. You have to put a lot of questions to persons that can actually inspire you and help you. And you need to try things out and be brave. And sometimes you're successful, sometimes you get beaten up a little bit. Then you stand up again and you try all over again. I mean, that's how it's going to work. I mean, you would never, ever develop as much as you can by just working with uncertainty. Right. That would never happen.
How about you? Have you ever had that moment of uncertainty and then you didn't know what to do?
Absolutely. I would say that's when you develop. So for me, you mentally have to turn that into an opportunity. There's actually one word that can help you do that. So, whenever you're uncertain or you feel that something happened that goes against whatever you had imagined and it's really a disaster, that's when uncertainty happens, or you have a task that's kind of daunting and you don't know what to do. Use the word fascinating. Can you say fascinating? Try it. Fascinating. You have to practice much more. And if you're really good at it, you actually go, fascinating. Because when you say that word, your mind opens up that there must be an opportunity in this disaster somewhere. And you begin to search for that. And my second advice is, as Mikael said, ask questions. Why are you uncertain? Ask 10 questions rapidly and write them all down. Just alone, asking the questions will help your mind get at least at a state where you feel like, okay, this is a challenge, an opportunity. I convert it from uncertainty to opportunity.
Yeah.
So remember, fascinating, yeah? When you get a...
So we had one person that was fascinated about deglobalization.
Yes, yes. And actually the answer to that question is also uncertainty. So you asked, why do we see globalization in reverse, increased nationalism, let's build some walls again? I think the root cause of that is, again, uncertainty. It stems from a number of things. I don't see my future job. I'm concerned that robots will take my jobs, and just look at the newspaper. I mean, the newspaper is full of uncertainty and terrible stories. And you have uncertainty because I see migration happening. So now I'm losing my job to robots and someone else is coming and taking my welfare. It's partly also, in particular, in countries where they don't have the same level of growth rates anymore. So these are all signs of uncertainty. I get uncertain about the future. If I'm uncertain about what's going on outside of my house, I stay in my house as an instant reaction. So all of those examples are actually, in my mind, symptoms. So why do we have this uncertainty about the future and my jobs? It's because the symptom is that some jobs were replaced. They either went to Asia or a machine took them. Actually, fact will say, and you know that, the World Economic Forum investigated that, 2/3 of the jobs are due to technology, not due to globalization, but we fail to explain that. Now, when we explain that, people get frightened about technology. And no country was ever successful by postponing technological advancement. So that's not an option. So I actually, by the way, migration, why is migration happening? Because people in some part of this world either have unreasonable conditions due to wars and what have you, and they go somewhere else, or they have unreasonable economic opportunity. We are going to have to create 500 million jobs in Africa over the next 20 years. Otherwise, the migration that we've seen so far is nothing. So how do we solve that? How do we create 500 million jobs in Africa? Through globalization. Globalization is the answer. When we can connect markets in Africa with global markets, then you create local prosperity, you can create local value, you can have education happening at more efficient ways, and suddenly prosperity happens in the society where you are. You don't want to migrate. People generally don't want to migrate. So I actually believe that we need to do a much better job, and all of that is, in essence, is avoiding that the populistic, simple argument, oh, it's due to the others, takes over. And social media is allowing lies to be told that influences people's minds that go more and more extreme, and we need to stop that. And instead, we argue we need more dreams. We need politicians and business leaders who have an opinion about how could the future be better, so that we inspire people to come out of their homes, not build more fences, and be part of that journey. And then we need the details, which is about reskilling entire populations for the skills that are relevant in the future. And that's why I said I'm a student, and you need to be students all of your life, not just until you graduate.
They are right now. We're gonna end because you've been a fantastic audience. I mean, I remember when I had to sit still for 2 hours, I could hardly do it. So you know, it's really impressive. We're gonna allow for 2 more questions, and then we're gonna wrap it up. So if there's any question left or right,
This one here.
over there's a question. Yeah, go
Yes.
ahead. And then I think in the back there. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, first of all, and I agree with you, technology is fascinating. But what I was going to ask, Yuval Harari, in his book, Sapiens, he says that technology was supposed for us to optimize the job, and then we would have more pleasure in life. But that's not what happens, as you told the example in the restaurant, like couples like in the phones, probably working. And what I was going to ask, how much are you investing in augmented reality and the virtual reality, and when do you think that it's going to affect our day-to-day lives? Thank you.
Thank you. And was there a final question over here? That was clear. And remember to tell us your name, if you will.
Hello, thank you. My name is Eva, and yeah, you talked a lot. It was very interesting, by the way. Thank you for that. You talked about leadership a lot. So I think we all are very familiar with the current ways leadership is done, and you talked a lot about change. So I guess in order to change a lot very quickly, because scientists say nowadays that climate change will occur in 11 years, so we basically have 11 years to prevent a very big climate change, which will definitely change a lot for us, but not for the better. So what do you think is important to change in leadership so that governments and people, and together with the decentralization you were talking about as well, is possible to make these changes that quickly enough?
Thank you so much for the question. So one question about technology and Yuval Noah Harari being the prophet or not, and one question about climate change and how are we going to achieve it. I know that Denmark is trying very hard, so I hope you guys have the answer, because if you don't, then who will? No pressure.
Both of them are for Jim, I think.
So maybe talk about augmented reality. So I've seen some of that technology. It's quite amazing. I actually was at the World Economic Forum meeting in China a couple of years ago, where I was in a virtual environment in Australia, the bush of Australia, and it was so real that it took me an hour when I took them off to get back to China mentally. I was like in the bush of Australia. So that shows the power of this technology. My concern is the following. I hope that the augmented world is not going to be more interesting than the real world, because we would lose our responsibility for the real world and just, move ourselves out into a fantasy world where everything is possible. And my philosophy around technology is not that technology should replace us so that we can have entertainment. What we write a lot in the book, and then Mikael has been a very big advocate for this, is that meaningfulness in life is what makes life relevant. And so, and entertainment is not meaningful, it's a distraction. And only when you get meaningfulness in what you do, whether that's a philanthropic world or whatever you're passionate about, but it's the meaningfulness that drives inspiration, but also high performance. And Mikael can talk hours and hours about how the meaningfulness of understanding the game, and the game becomes meaningful for all the players, and then you can perform at new levels. So I hope that we're not trying to replace human capability with technology, because technology could do a lot of that, but we're trying to enhance each one of you to be better at what's meaningful for you. That would be my answer to that. And when it comes to climate change, you're absolutely right. That's why I said in my part that we're the first generation who could end poverty. And we're the last generation who can end climate problems, because if we don't, they will take over all the problems, and you ain't seen nothing yet. So what does it take to solve that? Well, I actually believe, come back to the book again, it's about being ambitious enough and create enough understanding that solving climate change is a fascinating opportunity. Most companies today believe that if I'm also going to be green, then I'll have a green logo and I'll spend some money on doing good for climate and other things. And I actually believe that that's the wrong approach. If business would think that it's the way I make my money that's decisive for what influence I have in society, not that I make money and then what I spend my money on, but how I made my money. At Siemens, we have a zero CO2 emission target for 2030. You ask me today how we're going to achieve that? I have no idea. But that's the idea of a dream. You're ambitious. You set something that seems impossible, and it always seems impossible until it's done. That's what creates followership and inspiration. Mærsk, we're saying that we will have transportation of ships with containers CO2 emission free by 2050. That means we'll have to have vessels by 2030. That is almost impossible, and yet we've committed to that. That's leadership, and that's what it takes. Some guts, some ambition, and by the way, every time we save CO2 emission, we also save money. So it's not a bad business, it's a good business. And whoever invents solutions for those problems will be very wealthy and have meaningful lives and be great leaders. Whereas if you only invent solutions for sharing pictures of cappuccinos, it won't be the same meaningfulness. You will be largely entertained, though.
Very well. I think that's a very positive note to end on, is that when you set goals that seem impossible, that you actually can achieve them if you believe in them. And I want to thank you both again, because we come at the end of the Q&A now, and I believe you'll have some opportunity to get the books that both of you wrote, so you will be able to learn much more about it afterwards. But I want to say again thank you, because you talked about the word fascinating and all the things that happen when you say that word. I could see on many people's faces that they lit up, the eyes lit up when you said that word fascinating. And I think that that's really a recap of what we saw today. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much to Jim and Mikael. Very well.
Can I now invite you all to the book signing that Jim and Mikael have very kindly agreed to do for us now in the lobby? And thank you once again from all of us.